welcome to the Walking Dead Reviews. I'm Kim Horcher, and if I hear that song again, I will rain hellfire upon you all.
Easy Street.
Easy Street
I'm
by the
kill
Collapsible
myself.
Heart Club.
Yep.
It's real, and it was used for torture. This is Francis Maxwell. This is Tim Frisch. So there's another Rickless episode. 2 in a row, I take it, which means this show can go on without Rick, at least for a little bit.
At least for 2 episodes.
Yeah, well, he will be back next week if the preview is to be believed. This is a Daryl episode, so we were wondering what's up with Daryl after we were all yelling at him for getting Glenn killed, his recklessness. I mean, you can argue he did, you can argue it was going to happen. But we are following Daryl. He's given a choice. He is being held prisoner. And what will he choose?
He chose not to be Negan.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, he's still Daryl.
My only criticism, I actually really like this episode. My only criticism is kind of following on from what we talked about last week, whereas if you just flip these episodes, I think it would have been fine, right? So we were quite literally left hanging after the premiere, and I think this episode would have been enough to continue that storyline and kind of, it's almost like we were stabbed and then we were just left there to bleed out with no paramedics. This kind of would have given us some form to help us move on. It would have been like, okay, you've seen something traumatic. We're not going to completely disconnect you from it because we're going to focus on Daryl, who clearly has some thoughts of guilt towards what happened, as I think he should, but that's just my point of view on it. So that would be enough to keep us, but because there was that gap last week where it was this episode that was completely nothing to do with what was going on, despite a minor connection with the Saviors, it would have been good. But that being said, after last week's episode, which still I think was, the more I look back on it, the more I thought it was just completely irrelevant, this episode was actually kind of refreshing. It really drove home the message that these guys, this guy, along with the rest of them, are really horrible. Like, just a really horrible, horrible guy.
Well, I was wondering how we feel about Negan at this point, because the last time we saw him, he was truly like a psychotic villain.
Yeah.
I felt like more he was just a bully in this episode. Do you have different points of view on him now?
We've never seen Negan in not calm, collected asshole mode. He is, I'm sure he's a more complicated character than that. I'm sure we'll see the full range that Negan has to offer, probably a little bit in flashback and a little bit how he deals with Rick's group. But he's pretty much always the guy in charge, and now we're starting to learn why. I think one of the things this episode did really, really well was it explained what life is like as a savior with very little dialogue. It was very good visual storytelling for the most part in this episode. The beginning where Dwight is making a sandwich and showing the ins and outs of like being good in the savior's world was really, really good, and it is in stark comparison or contradiction to the last episode where it was all just people talking to you about how the kingdom works. Yeah. This is how the kingdom does this, and this is this element of the kingdom, and the kingdom, like, it didn't work at all. It didn't work at all, but this episode worked so well in that sense. It was also a really good character development for Dwight, who I think is the actual star of this episode, not Daryl. We learned so much about Dwight, and it's done so well until the end, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. Do you think Dwight is going to swing around? Because it just seems like he wants to be Daryl a bit.
I think he's the most interesting and complex character that we've seen this season.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Negan is a great character, but as of right now, very one-dimensional. I don't think that'll be the case for long, but Dwight is very complicated and like almost sympathetic at the end of this episode.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. We have empathy towards him in this episode, which is completely a stark contrast. I don't have any empathy to Negan, and I think that's a testament to how good an actor Jeffrey Dean Morgan is at playing this role. He's fantastic. Like, I'm not going to say I hate him because I hate the character. I think he's funny. I think he's a smooth talker, but he's sick. Like, he's sick in the mind. There's no doubt that this world has definitely brought out the worst in him. But I wanted to piggyback off what you said. The very moment we see Dwight start making the sandwich, right? He is basically enjoying the fruits of everyone else's labor, but he's not really enjoying it. You see him take a moment before he eats it. I actually thought it would have been better if he just actually lost his appetite and never actually ate the sandwich, because it would have really like drove home the message as to I do want to enjoy all this greatness that I'm getting because I worked my way up, but he's seeing someone that he clearly knew who was hanging on the stake, someone that he probably knew before, just as he was about to eat the sandwich, and then he still eats it because he's hungry. But it's like all these things that people in the kingdom are thinking are luxury to everyone. He's seen people kill themselves so that he can actually have this.
And he is absolutely eating the sandwich to make it a metaphor, by the way. After what we've seen through this whole episode of, his super hot wife getting lost.
Super hot wife.
Yeah,
she's very good looking for the Walking Dead standards, which is, end of the world. There's no makeup. Whoa. But it's he's absolutely like biting the sandwich. Maybe it like tastes good on the outside, but the sacrifice inside of it is metaphorically very bitter. He's very much a part of this. Maybe he'd like to be where like Daryl, passed out on the floor with vomit everywhere or whatever that was. But he's for now deep into this. I definitely empathized with his friend who was like, why are we doing this? There's one of him and so many of us. This makes no sense.
And that's the smoking gun for the season, I think.
Absolutely.
Is that knowledge, that realization, that's what's going to be the end of Negan when the uprising
There's going to be a revolution, and that's what I want to see.
Yeah, but again, I think that is what everyone's saying to themselves. But you put yourself in that situation. The world is collapsing around you. Like, just as the stark contrast as Ezekiel in the episode before, it's like there's a leader that everyone's just falling in line behind, and he's playing the role. He's like, you know what? I will be the king. This will be stupid. People can mock me. I have a tiger. But if it's going to keep them in line, fine. And then on the other side of it, Negan's using the more brutal approach. Is like, I will beat the living hell out of you with a baseball bat, and you're going to fall in line, despite the fact that there's huge men, like not just there's just a bunch of people around them, but there's big guys.
Fat Joey.
Yeah, there's not big fat Joey. There's huge guys around them that could just overwhelm them like that. But they're actually used to this way of the world. That's kind of what I was mentioning before with Ezekiel. Like in that episode, he was writing quotes on the wall as if he was like he was writing scriptures for the future, as if he was leaving notes for them. He's starting his own religion. But you can do it in this world because they don't have anything to hold them to what they used to know.
Which makes me want to know how Negan got started, because you can't be all by yourself with a baseball bat and convince everyone
I think he could. Like, I imagine in my head, he deprogrammed some guy, and then another guy, and then another guy, and then he had this group, and then they have
all
this physical
these
might.
super hot wives.
He's crazy. Like, he's not just beating them from the outside, he's beating them from the inside, if Daryl's torture is showing you anything at all.
Which is compelling and interesting and makes me want to know more. Real quick before we wrap, I do want to, I have a small criticism of this episode, because I think it was an excellent episode. It just did too much hand-holding. Like, I thought the scenes with Dwight and Negan about, a free pass at the pussy bar, as crude as that is, okay, we now learn a little bit more about Dwight. And then the scene in the stairwell with his ex-wife, we learn a little bit more. And okay, now I get it. I know what happens. To need Negan to tell the whole story at the end, it's like, yeah, we figured that out 20 minutes ago. Like that.
Would you rather have Dwight kind of be more open with it with someone else?
I just think
I
he
just
wanted
feel
it
as though,
all,
yeah,
right?
they did a really good job of cluing us into the little elements of Dwight's backstory, and we had got to figure it out together, and it was good and interesting, and then the show reveals it all to us anyway, and it was like, yeah, we figured that out. I don't need you to explain it to me now. That sort of takes away from the fun of learning it slowly, good storytelling.
I think it wanted to just bolster that, wouldn't you have empathy for his situation? Like, if you were in the situation with your wife or your girlfriend, would you end up like Dwight or would you end up like Daryl? It's hard to know, but I think, that was a little heavy-handed, which is unheard of in this show. But I think
it was such a good job.
It was trying to serve a purpose and just make sure we understand it.
Did he have empathy for his friend that obviously broke free from the group that he shot in the back? Because if he had empathy for him, why would he not just shoot him in the head?
I think he did, because when that extended shot where he was looking at him in the pen, and like even though like he's gone, there's nothing behind the eyes, but they're still like focusing on his eyes.
Still had to shoot him and then take him back as a walker. He couldn't put him out of his misery.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, it's like you're eating the sandwich. You're on a leash. You're no longer you. You are Negan. I think that was driving that point.
The last thing I do want to say on Dwight, very, very last thing, is I think that he's actually looking, I think he was looking for Daryl to make that transition to validate his own choice. Do you know what I mean? Like he was looking at Daryl like, why can't you just accept it and just make this choice? You're defying him, and it's kind of making him question to himself, Why did I
Could I have held out?
Could I
Did I have to give up so
Absolutely.
much?
No, I've gave away everything that I held true to myself, and
Yeah, that's a
Compelling
great
and
point.
interesting character development. Good job, Walking Dead. More of this, I think.
and then now we have
Stop
a
daring
Rick
us to stop
episode
watching
next.
the show.
Yes, we can live without Rick. We can live without more like this. Please and thank you.
Next episode will be featuring Rick and Michonne because at the end of the episode they
Yeah,
said
I
next
seen
week
it.
on The Walking Dead. So sorry, Tim. We'll see you next week on The Walking Dead.